Ahoy, and welcome. This is Admiral, with my take on the latest DLC announcement, the Viking Sagas. There had been speculation about a possible Viking DLC based on an unused Viking garrison flag introduced with the last Chieftains update, implying a new architecture set, and this dropped before I had time to finish a video on that, so we'll run with it. The DLC will arrive sometime in the fall, adding 3 new civilizations, the Danes, Saxons, and Varangians. 2 of the 3 are arguably splits off the existing Viking civilization, and the Saxons are adjacent, but more broadly Germanic, probably filling some of the time and space between the Goths and the Teutons, and probably mainly based around the Saxons who invaded England, or the Anglo-Saxons. So I will be very disappointed if we don't get this guy as a hero unit. The Danes will have the Jomsviking Raider unit that throws flaming torches, and my guess is it does burn damage against buildings and ships. The Saxons have the Hearth Troop, from Anglo-Saxon Hjortwerod, an Anglo-Saxon concept comparable to the Scandinavian Housecarl. It throws a javelin before attacking at melee range. The Varangian unique unit is the Jarl, a rather generic name applicable to several civilizations now, but like another Germanic unique unit, throws axes. I'm guessing this has anti-infantry bonus and or pass-through damage, perhaps like a mounted variant of the Chakram thrower. There will be 3 new campaigns, but it says that all of them will follow the life of Harold Hardrada. Shared units include the Varangian Guard, a shock infantry raider that generates gold, the Longship, noted as versatile, perhaps meaning that it can carry troops or portage across land as I and some others have suggested, and the Mounted Crossbowman, described as slow-firing but hard-hitting, like a conquistador variant. Mounted Crossbowmen make some sense as a European alternative to cavalry archers, but not really as a Viking-themed unit. Whether we're talking about the Norse, Danes, or Swedes, crossbows were not a notable weapon for them during the Viking Age, especially not from horseback. Although Norman infantry used them during the Battle of Hastings, that combination was more associated with later France, Italy, and Germany. So it will be silly if this is just a Viking regional unit rather than a Central and Western European regional. So those are the basics. Now I'll mention what I think are the pros and cons of this news. So that I can end on a positive note, I'll start off with what I don't like as much. As much as I do think Vikings are awesome, and am a huge fan of Germanic and Northern European history, adding 3 new civilizations while keeping the existing Vikings really does seem like overkill. Varangians in particular is a weird name for a civilization, as it refers most literally to someone who swore an oath to serve a foreign lord, most famously the Varangian Guard that served the Byzantine emperors. This would almost be like having a civilization called the Swiss Mercenaries, or the French Foreign Legion. It's not quite as bad as that, as the term can be used a bit more broadly, especially to represent the Kievan Rus, although that overlaps heavily with what the current Slav civilization covers. So of the 3, this one strikes me as the most unnecessary, and either just calling them Swedes or reworking the Slavs would have made much more sense. Having 2 civs for this DLC I think would have been more than enough. While it's far from the 3 Kingdoms level of unnecessary or unfitting, along with the previous 2 DLCs, this does follow a pattern of basing civilization choices around correspondence to modern countries and fandoms, rather than an emphasis on representing great medieval forgotten empires or filling in empty areas of the map that do not correspond to large modern player bases. Certainly understandable from a marketing perspective, but it is unfortunate for those interested in the underrated history of those parts of the world that are not constantly having their stories paraded in pop culture. I will absolutely credit the devs for telling some of the underrated stories and filling in some empty areas of South America, as the demographics of those areas at least aligned with their commercial interests. But once again, it's a shame that they couldn't spare one more slot for any of the other great civilizations there, but seemed to think nothing of throwing down 3 more civilizations each for areas that are already comparatively well represented for a Viking split, and of course for the 3 Kingdoms factions, which were already covered on a civilizational level by the existing Chinese. Rant aside, I do think this looks and will be much better received than the 3 Kingdoms, but I think it's fair to point out how much the design philosophy seems to have changed since the Forgotten Empires era, and how much the concept of a civilization has been watered down. That said, there is plenty of interesting and timeline-appropriate history here, and the Viking era is a very iconic part of the medieval period in such a way that one could understand having more than a single civilization representing it in a game like AoE2. So I'm optimistic that this can be a fairly good DLC, even if it was far from my first choice. In any case, I'm always going to advocate for less beaten to death but still historically important worldwide civilizations, before insisting on more European splits that all fall under existing civilizations. The biggest positive aspect here for me, as with the last chieftains, are the new assets, and especially the architecture set, which generally looks very good, especially in later ages. Although the thatch roof coloring in Feudal Age does look a little off to me, at least at first glance. But after years of never making new architecture sets, to the point of assuming on the forums that they had a shoestring budget, it's nice to see them invest in this more heavily in recent DLCs, rather than the South American set being a one-off. I especially like the long wooden bridge, and I'm sure we'll be seeing it in a scenario for Stamford Bridge with a particularly formidable berserker. The twisting wooden walkways are very nice as well, and it looks like we'll have seals and reindeer at least as new fauna. The implied mechanics look interesting, and generally seem a little more grounded than in other recent DLCs, like they're using the existing design space more before adding new mechanics, which I think is good. The other aspect I like is more coverage of the middle of the core time frame, by contrast to the Three Kingdoms, which was before the medieval period, and the Last Chieftains, which was mostly after it. So those are my thoughts on the upcoming DLC. Let me know what you think. That's all for today, and thanks for watching. This has been me viewing the various Varangian vanquishers, villains, vagabonds, and Viking variations visiting before winter. Till Bardaga!